to Fit to Speak from the Archives. I'm Eugene, glad as ever to be with you. Ben Franklin said in part that nothing is certain except death and taxes. Over 230 years later, we might add content creation to that list. And today, we revisit the conversation that we had 2 years ago with Brittany Johnson and journalist Marcus Dowling about content creation in the novel coronavirus pandemic. And I spoke with podcast host Kristan Vermeulen about the launch of Makers of Maine and the focus of her podcast on the maker economy. Hello and welcome to Fit to Speak. I'm Eugene. So glad to have you with us. In case you've been living under a rock these past several months, we're still very much in a global pandemic, folks. And so many people have been using this downtime quite effectively, I must say, to produce all sorts of great content, from podcasts to, yes, TikTok videos. Yes, that TikTok that has been in the news quite a bit as of late. With so many people in the podcasting and TikTok space, we wonder, is there an opportunity for new people to come through? And what does the future hold for these platforms, especially in the post-pandemic era, whatever that comes? I talk with Marcus Dowling and Brittany Johnson about those questions and a lot more. And later in the show, we talk with Kristan Vermeulen, the host of Makers of Maine. Her podcast talks about important people, subject matter, and a state that is ignored, very much so, by the corporate media. We'll get to that in just a second, but first, let's get right to our panel. And joining me now is Marcus Dowling, journalist, entrepreneur, and cultural creative, and Brittany Johnson, the executive producer of Common Sense Entertainment. Guys, welcome. Nice to have you with me. And let's go ahead and get started. So, Marcus, let's go ahead and start with you. So, as you know, as we all know, we are still in a global pandemic. And I'll tell you, like, so many people I'm seeing are creating a lot of content, including Megyn Kelly, who recently announced that she is going to start her own podcast. She's also starting her own production company as well. But as we know, she was notably fired from NBC News for saying this.
But what is racist? Because truly, you do get in trouble if you are a white person who puts on blackface on Halloween, or a black person who puts on whiteface for Halloween. Like, back when I was a kid, that was okay as long as you were dressing up as like a character. There was a controversy on The Real Housewives of New York with Luann, as she dressed as Diana Ross, and she made her skin look darker than it really is, and people said that that was racist. And I don't know, I thought, like, who doesn't love Diana Ross? She wants to look like Diana Ross for one day. I don't know how, like, that got racist on Halloween. It's not like she's walking around in
I
general.
have not seen it, but
You
it sounds a little
have
racist
watched
to me.
it. Me too.
And by the way, I haven't seen the other,
too.
but if she really wanted to look like Diana Ross, she should have dressed as Michael Jackson. Because they...
I don't know. I can't keep up with the number of people that...
just come on, we're already in the deep end.
Literally.
Of
I can't keep up with the number of people that we're offending just by being, like, normal people these days. Okay.
I must note that Jacob Soboroff and Jenna Bush Hager, they looked mighty uncomfortable. I mean, look at this. I mean, they just looked mighty uncomfortable when she said all of those things. But anyway, Marcus, what are you seeing now in terms of the opportunities for content creators, especially in this global pandemic?
Okay, well, I'll say that there's the barrier for entry for content creators has certainly been removed. We're in a democratized space in the content creation space. Spotify's purchases of numerous platforms within the last 18 months has allowed there to be a one-to-one for people who want to podcast to be able to platform their podcasts. That's a benefit in the sense that if you have a creative idea, you can now take it to full fruition. But the other issue in regards to that is that now you're looking at monetization in the podcast space is the most significant issue, and the most significant barrier actually to people wanting to continue podcasts. There's something like 31% or something of podcasts make it past like 5 podcasts right now. It's a ridiculously low number, and that's in part due to the fact that people don't see the monetization aspect. With Spotify, there's a way that you can plug in on the back end and attempt to add advertising to your own cast, and you get a percentage of that advertising. It's very similar in sense to what Instagram is doing with badges for online creators too. The only problem with that is that you have to have a following in order to do this. You have to have people that are engaging with your podcast. And as anyone will tell you, even like the top podcasts in the game, like Stone Cold Steve Austin, for instance, like it's hard to be able to grow a podcast past a certain point. So that becomes the major issue in the sense that in order to monetize it, you have to be able to also develop fan base. That gets into marketing, that gets into development. This is far past just sitting on your rear end and saying, I have a couple of things I want to say about that episode of Game of Thrones or whatever. And I think that's important in the sense that ideally it teaches people. I mean, whether or not this boom lasts, it teaches people the level of work that it takes in order to be a cogent and talented content creator.
I think that you mentioned the money aspect,
Yes, I think
which
it's the biggest thing. Yeah.
it is just so key. It's been very interesting because we mentioned in our first episode that Joe Rogan, he has moved over to Spotify. His library, most of it anyway, we'll get to that in a second, has moved over to Spotify to the tune of $100 million. And then you've got, like, now you've got Sarah Cooper, who has been on TikTok,
Right.
um, of course, imitating Trump.
Yes.
And she has gotten her Netflix show. Not only has she got a Netflix special, I should say, but also she is getting a show. She's developing a show that is on CBS
Right.
based on one of her books, How to Be Successful Without Hurting Men's Feelings. Let's think about this for a second, because especially with Brittany, we've been at this for quite a bit here, in terms of Common Sense Entertainment, and that we pride ourselves on really remaining independent and having editorial and the creative control over the projects that we do. And you think about Megyn Kelly, as we said, she's starting her own stuff. She says that there will be no corporate overlords running her podcast. This is all going to be self-funded and all that.
Yeah.
Same with me here. Same with me here, guys. Just one second. I'm just saying, hey, I
Everything starts that way. Like if you have a podcast, you're like, I'm gonna do things my way. It's gonna be my concept and everything. And then you're like, wait, I need to get paid. And then that's
Exactly.
when Spotify comes along and to say, okay. So a thing that I wanted to make sure that I mentioned in the midst of doing this broadcast is that Spotify makes more money from podcasting than it does music. So while Spotify started as a musical platform, the music industry is in such a situation where they are using all of these funds from music in order to pay the music industry. So they don't make a revenue off of that. So largely in order to make revenue as a platform, they must depend upon podcasting. And the reason why is that if you do a podcast for say 30 to 45 minutes, you have a kept audience for 45 consecutive minutes. The average song is 3 minutes and 30 seconds, minimally. So you have 15 times longer, in theory, if you have a 45-minute podcast, to have somebody as a kept audience. And you can drop 3 commercials in there and you're able to get, ad revenue. So that's important into understanding this conversation as to why podcasting is such an issue of concern for everyone, because of the advertising potential of doing so on a platform like a Spotify.
I think we're getting to the point now where there's just so many people, everybody and their mother is doing a podcast.
Yes, they are.
Everyone and their mother is doing it. And I think we're going to get to a point where we're going to end up just like kind of in the .com era, where it's like you had so many search engines, you had so many stuff, and then, this stuff is going to be depleted. Brittany, what do you think of that?
Isn't this similar, if not the exact kind of situation back in the early 1900s? And I know I'm going way back, but bear with me.
No, by all means.
Where we had so many newspapers vying for attention that they would get these superstar reporters, and they would, engage in yellow journalism and having all these like very flowery, poetic and sometimes sensationalist and gossipy news items just to get the audience attention. And I feel like this is what's happening right now. That you are right, that we have everybody and their mama creating a podcast, and we also have it on the side of certain celebrities, either from their professional world or even not in their professional world. Sometimes this is their chance to cross platform and make revenue streams that way. And that's a topic for another time. But this is kind of what we're seeing right now is who can throw the proverbial spaghetti of content avenue to the wall and make it stick. Who can we get to be the big names after the kerfluffle has happened and we've gotten everybody to find, like, weed out who's the best? Because it could be these celebrities or it could be someone's unknown grandmother who becomes a sensational hit and keeps it going for years to come. So I think this time, especially with around the Joe Budden situation where he's speaking out, he's acting out, he's saying, hey, look, I think I deserve X, Y, and Z. And he might be right, not contesting that, but it's more the idea of, hey, this is the content I want to provide and I want to provide it my way. I'm going to try to forge a new path and hopefully this gamble pays off. And even if it doesn't pay off by me keeping my content uh, independent, let's just say, it might pay off that I might be able to get snatched up by somebody else who's trying to compete with Spotify, maybe Apple Music, maybe another Pandora, if you would like to throw them back in the ring. Google got rid of their music platform, so they're not very happy to jump on that bandwagon. But just being able to say, hey, I'm a piece of the competition that you can use to leverage against someone. So I think this is an all-out competition, not dissimilar to when you have old pros going back in, and at first they're doing commentary for the game and then they go across the journalism aisle to actually do analysis for the game. So is this any different than your Charles Barkley or your James Brown,
or just like
doing
Tony Romo now on
right,
CBS?
The best
or
part about
some of
it is,
the right, or some of the older Premier League and U.S. soccer guys jumping over the athlete to journalism fence. And I think, and I'm gonna put you on the spot, Eugene, I think there's something to be said that some people might have that journalistic raw talent, but they're not a journalist. And some people might be able to produce or at least have this captivating persona for a podcaster, but they're not an entertainer in that way. Does that mean they can't learn, grow, flourish, and get what their audience wants and deserves? Of course not. They can always learn that. But not everybody is necessarily going to have that raw talent to be able to jump out there, make themselves into a podcast, and it'd be successful for years to come. In fact, I bet if you go on Spotify now, see how many podcasts there are that last beyond the 2-year mark. At the very least, I would give them at least 2 years. But even then, see how many podcasts last beyond the 5-year mark. And you'd be surprised at the handful of podcasts in each category that have lasted because they had that oomph that somebody else didn't have. And I think that's what's really important to kind of take a shape of once you're kind of doing this 2020 comparison of the podcast landscape. If this is new radio, then how is new radio shaping out? Are we only going to have 5 top content creators and then everybody else vying for 5th and 10th? Or are we going to have a plethora of choices where people come in, they do what they need to do, or they have this moment in their entertainment lives, and then they move on to the next thing. But we still have that moment captured for when we want to go back, but there's still room to explore and have new creatives come in and fill in gaps. And I'm very interested to see how that's going to play out.
So some interesting developments have recently came out about who's going to end up buying TikTok. And I'm seeing here that the owner of TikTok has chosen Oracle over Microsoft. This is according to the Associated Press. Now, this is a real huge development. Remember that as we've, Trump and Pompeo, as we all know, they have been gunning to try and get rid of TikTok by 20th of September. And Interestingly, Walmart here, they're saying they had planned to be a partner with Microsoft. They said that they continue to have an interest in the TikTok investment, and they're talking about it with ByteDance. The deal still has to be approved. It has to be reviewed by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States.
I just find that it's interesting. This is like out of the classic business portfolio of diversifying your interests for Oracle of all companies to buy a platform that is totally not in their wheelhouse. I mean, they might have other investment portfolio investments that we're not, discussing as being this giant jump into unknown territory. But this is at least the most memorable one I've heard Oracle kind of owning. So I think this is something that goes back to that original point that I made earlier in this video, just talking about how with all these companies, it's going back to tradition, even if they have to force their traditional ways onto a more modern take on how to do business. So it's diversifying your portfolio and diversifying your portfolio with one of the hottest properties, or at least the most talked about properties right now. But I hope this is not something that leads akin to like the Yahoo Tumblr deal or the Reddit deal, where a company buys a platform because a lot of users use it and they think, man, ad revenue will just be rolling in, and they realize that it's a lot more to handle because of either controversies or just not getting the use culture that primarily use the platform, or something else that could cause this not to be a good investment in the end. So it'll be interesting to see if other companies join Oracle, to see if they're going to kind of maximize that opportunity to jump on while the property's hot, and see if this is something that will kind of stem the tide, or if this is something that's going to send youth culture to think, well, now a company that's X years old is buying this property. I'm not interested anymore. What, on to the new thing, on to the next thing kind of mentality. So we'll see.
The subject, the economy, the maker economy, that is. The state, Maine. And the people, the makers, the artisans, the artists, the musicians. And yet, when you put that all together, we don't hear about that much, if at all, really, in the corporate media. And yet, Kristan Vermeulen, the host of Makers of Maine, she really taps into these issues in her podcast. And let me tell you, when I first listened to this first part of the first episode, I'll just tell you, it just had me at hello.
I wanted to kick off this episode with a quote from a well-known chef and a TV host, Anthony Bourdain, rest in peace, what a wonderful man. And the quote goes, "There are a few essential elements you find in the spirit of a Mainer: a humble appreciation of well-crafted things, wit dry enough you may not know when the joke ends and when it began, and most importantly, a love for the land and the sea."
Joining me now is Kristan Vermeulen, the host of Makers of Maine. Kristan, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. And let's go ahead and get started, okay? So the soundbite that I played earlier for our viewers with where you mentioned Anthony Bourdain, this gives away a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking to you about here today, because what Anthony did so brilliantly, especially with his show Parts Unknown and some of the other stuff that he's done, No Reservations, The Layover, and so forth, is that he used food and drink as the medium as a way to connect with the viewers about different cultures and things of that nature. And what I'm seeing in your podcast, The Makers of Maine, is that you're using the maker economy as the medium to connect with the stories behind the makers. So I definitely want to hear about the concept and how the show kind of sort of came to be. But first, let me just ask you, why do this podcast now, especially in the midst of a global pandemic? And really, why Maine? I know that it is the last question that you ask your viewers, your interviewees, but I wanted to actually kick off with that first. So why that?
So I'm actually originally from Maryland, but I have lived in Maine for about 2.5 to 3 years now. I reside in the greater Portland area with my lovely family. And I married a gentleman, his name's Kip, and he is actually the Maine native. He is from a town called Jefferson, Maine, which is up along the coast near Damariscotta Lake. And I find that through my journey here as an individual and finding myself and finding my friends and getting to know my family a bit more up here, that the state is truly remarkable with its tourist destinations. Its food industry is amazing with the restaurant scene in Portland. But then also at the same time, there are a variety of makers that encompass the Maine marketplace. There are 90% of our small businesses here encompass Maine businesses, and it's truly remarkable.
Wow, 90%, huh? 90%
I think
of
it's
small
over
business.
90% now, actually.
Over 90%.
Yeah.
And that's huge because, I mean, and we'll get to this in a second, but we are seeing, especially with this global pandemic, a lot of big box stores close. We're also seeing a lot of mom and pop businesses close as well, sadly. I mean, a lot of people have been trying to get the loans, and everything else, but some are turned down, and it doesn't work out for some, sadly. And I find it interesting, definitely, that over 90% of the businesses in Maine are indeed small businesses. And there's going to be a lot of impact there that I foresee for a lot of this. And tell us real quick, and we'll address a lot of that in a second, but tell us about your podcast. What gave you the idea to create Makers of Maine?
So the idea started actually before the pandemic happened. I was talking to a couple friends of mine. One's a photographer, and the other one is a web developer. And I was like, guys, a lot of these small businesses and makers here can't afford public relations help. They can't afford marketing assistance. What can we do to give back and getting a voice out there with these makers that encompass this lovely state? So that's kind of how the podcast idea prompted. And unfortunately, I couldn't launch it prior to the pandemic because I had a child in February, right before this pandemic hit. And
Congratulations.
thank you so much. And, after that had happened, about a month later, I was like, okay, let's kind of get this idea started because right now there are some businesses that are hurting tremendously up here in Maine and they need that voice tremendously right now. And they have such history and such growth before the pandemic hit and needs to continue. And there's some that are actually being very successful, even more, even like during this pandemic, everyone's buying their products and truly giving back to them. So I've been seeing both pros and cons. So either way, I really want to set the tone for these makers and getting it out there to individuals coming to Maine, to individuals in Maine, to other makers in Maine, as well as other media conglomerates in the world that need to know their voices.
As we mentioned earlier, given the novel coronavirus and the big box stores closing and downsizing, and as you said, over 90% of the businesses in Maine are small businesses. So there are a lot of implications that if this pandemic continues and we have all the shutdowns and everything else, this is going to really hurt a lot of people, and especially the state of Maine, really. And you have the whole tariff situation as well that's been going on. And the factory sector here in the U.S. is in the deepest slump that it's been in 10 years, according to Reuters. And this was before the pandemic. I can't imagine what the situation is now with all of this. So tell us more about that maker economy and what implications do you think that this will have as we get to hopefully a post-pandemic stage? Will there be an opportunity for maybe perhaps a new industrial revolution?
So, great question. There are a lot of Maine makers that have a lot of history. So, the state of Maine has a lot of history in cut and sew, for instance. So, a lot of Maine encompasses mills, paper mills, cotton mills. So, a lot of them have a lot of makers back in the day, back in like the 1800s time frame, where they're going and creating products. So a lot of this history has formulated into the present where a lot of these makers have continued that craft or they're innovating that craft even further. So what you said about the tariffs, a lot of these makers, they aren't affected by that because all their products are made in the United States. They're made in Maine. And the materials that they get are from the US. And sometimes, most of it is in Maine, but sometimes it could be outside of Maine too, such as New England or, greater United States in our nation. But I find it that right now, before the pandemic, that made in USA products is very important. And it seems like with the tariffs increasing, that it needs to be very relevant. And, a lot of media and people in our world are gravitating towards made in USA products now that I've been seeing because of that. And then also with the pandemic in mind, I've been seeing that, the community is being uplifting in a matter of supporting these makers and buying their products and what have you. But these makers also love to give back to the community. So not so much they're focused on their craft and, worried about themselves as an entrepreneur. They want to give back to others, so our food banks, the frontline workers. There's just such a variety. And that's what Maine is all about. It's all about the authenticity. It's about the products and the make and the craft that they're into and the giving back moments and the networking, because every entrepreneur is dealing with the same challenges. So they're all in it together. So I would say that the history really is a definite connector when it comes to talking about makers in Maine. And now I feel like it's going to continue to lift up and grow even further. It's like we're going back in time, sort of. Like we're really, really thinking that USA manufacturing needs to be back. It needs to come back and it needs to be uplifted. We need more, craftsmen. We need more products made in the US.
As you know, I'm not a Maine resident, and yet here I am. I'm talking with you, and I'm listening to the podcast. I've listened to all the episodes, and I think everybody should really give the show a listen. Now, what is it about the show that would draw the out-of-state person in? Like, what is in that for them?
Sure. So you get to hear really the stories behind how folks craft really out of the box products. So axes, plant-based apparel, clean beauty. I have an oyster farm I'm going to be posting soon that I did an interview with, because our seafood is very well known here in Maine. And I feel like a lot of people, when they think of Maine, they think of, the lighthouses, the lobsters, the beaches, the rocky beaches, the sailing, which is very important. I would say that definitely encompasses our state. But really, I feel like when you come to Maine, you kind of go back in time some, because some of these makers do have a history, and it's truly authentic and honest. And also, not only do you hear about the journeys of just the process of the craft, you also hear about the challenges, the successes from each of these entrepreneurs. I feel like Maine gives people an opportunity to start a business here. It's actually celebrating its bicentennial this year, their 200th birthday.
Oh, very nice.
And a lot of older folks live here. And we are seeing that a lot of the younger folks are moving on to other states to get more of experience. But now that we're establishing more and growing more in the small business industry, as well as some bigger industries are here as well, we're trying to get those younger folks to stay or to come back and live here. So that's a huge initiative behind this as well. So I feel like we're encouraging people to come to Maine because we need it. We need to keep growing the small business industry. We need to kind of grow like a simple hobby and turn it into a business. Like, it's truly remarkable what one simple idea could turn into. So that's really why I'm sharing these stories, because not only do I want them to hear about these examples, but to experience it for themselves, to get into the grind of how they can turn their hobby into a business.
We'll hear more from Kristan as well as Brittany and Marcus in next week's edition of Fit to Speak from the Archives. An incredible conversation. I hope you'll be able to join us. In the meantime, be sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts, and be sure to check out our Substack and Patreon pages for exclusive content and to support all the work that we do here. Finally, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell on our YouTube channel so that you do not miss any of our episodes. Until next week, I'm Eugene. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, the best things in life are worth saving.